Our second scripture today is from Genesis chapter 21, verses 8 through 21. The Old Testament reading relates the moving story of the rejection of Hagar and Ishmael and their eventual rescue by God. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite of him, a good way off, about the distance of a bowshot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
It's time to play Family Feud. In the popular TV show, Family Feud, two families compete as contestants. Each family takes their shot at guessing the results of various surveys taken among 100 people, and they gain points based on how many people of the 100 gave the same response as the guess. The contestants usually find the high-scoring answers fairly quickly, but the trick to the game is finding those answers that few people said. You see, if they can't find all those responses, even the uncommon ones, they risk losing it all. The other family has the chance to come and steal everything. The competition between families can exploit even the smallest overlooked detail. In order to win, families have to look at the not-so-obvious answers. For example, let's suppose for a moment that Family Feud happened to ask a survey that included the family in today's reading from Genesis, the family of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. That was a family that had their own family feud. That family, in its particular circumstances, might not give the typical responses that others might guess. Their answers might throw off the contestants. For example, suppose the survey asks Abraham, what is something a man might look forward to in retirement? The contestants quickly give the more common answers, such as more time for family, travel, hobbies. But no one thinks of Abraham's response. What is something a man might look forward to in retirement? Abraham says, becoming a first-time father. You see, Abraham and his wife Sarah were childless for a long time, despite God's persistent promise that he would become the father of a great nation. Sarah wanted to help out, so she offered her servant Hagar for Abraham to take as a second wife. Now, the practice was permissible in those days because children, particularly sons, were a form of security. Sons could provide for the family as their parents grew older. So if the family couldn't find sons, they were allowed to a father was allowed to take more wives in order to get those sons for security. So at the ripe old age of 86, Abraham became the proud father of Ishmael, who was born to Hagar, the servant. But God wasn't finished giving children to Abraham. Before long, Sarah herself, who was also very old, had a son, Isaac. And Abraham became a father yet again. Abraham's unusual circumstances led him to give an uncommon answer to the survey. The next survey question includes Sarah in the questioning. It says, fill in the blank. A mother usually tells her child not to play with what? Now, some common answers might include matches, knives, wild animals. But no one could guess Sarah's answer. A mother usually tells her child not to play with what? A child who might take part of her son's inheritance. You see, Sarah didn't get along with Hagar or Ishmael. Hagar, as the mother of Abraham's son, felt empowered by that honor, and this empowerment threatened Sarah. Sarah and Hagar lived in a world long ago where their well-being depended on men, from their fathers to their husbands to their sons. They depended on men for their security. And now that Sarah saw Hagar gain social status in her relationship with Abraham, she felt the security that once belonged only to her begin to slip away. And Sarah took it out on Hagar. She would use her more privileged position to treat Hagar harshly. When Sarah bore a child of her own, a child God promised to make into a great nation, she now feared that Hagar's son Ishmael would threaten her newfound security. She complained to Abraham after seeing the two children together. The rivalry between Sarah and Hagar continued to escalate, and their children became wrapped up and a part of that rivalry. Sarah's unusual circumstances led her to give an uncommon answer to the survey. The next survey includes Hagar. Name a gift that might disappoint a child. Now, some common answers of gifts that might disappoint a child might include clothes, socks, food rather than toys. But no one guessed Hagar's response. Name a gift that might disappoint a child. Hagar's response: a one-way trip to the wilderness with only some bread and a single canteen of water to survive on. I'm sure Hagar was quite disappointed in Abraham's treatment of her and Ishmael. This isn't exactly behavior one would expect from the father of a great nation to, in the midst of this family feud, take Hagar and his son that he had with Hagar and kick them out of the house to fend for themselves in the wilderness. But this is how Abraham handled the situation. He left Hagar to fend for herself, alone in the wilderness with her child. Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar didn't go on a game show, but they did have a family feud. They had a family feud within their family. Tensions always ran high as each member strove for something that conflicted with the other's goals. Hagar sought dignity in a family structure that saw her, because of her position in life, as undeserving. Sarah sought security amidst a socially shifting landscape. And Abraham, before he made that decision to let Hagar and Ishmael fend for themselves, was looking for practical solutions to the problem. Verse 11 from our reading today says that the matter was very distressing to him. He wanted to keep the family together, but the feud was more than he could handle. And he ended up hurting Hagar and Ishmael. A family feud has no easy solution. In our culture today, many of us find ourselves in a kind of family feud. The dynamics of every family is different, and no two are alike. But sometimes the dynamics are just more than anyone can handle, even more than the great Abraham can handle. But feuds are in more than just families. In the United States today, much of our whole society is engaged in rivalry. People have taken sides and grown entrenched in political battles. Some, like Hagar, seek dignity in social structures that see them as undeserving, only left to find themselves fending for themselves. Some, like Sarah, seek security amidst a socially shifting landscape, only to see their security continue to erode. Some, like Abraham, seek practical solutions to the problem, only to get distressed when the problem gets too big to handle and end up making decisions that hurt people. Tensions run high. No one wins in a family feud. In today's scripture, the characters are engaged in a family feud, and in today's scripture, I find insights about how to move forward. As Hagar wandered in the wilderness, when she ran out of water, she left Ishmael under a bush because she did not want to see him die. As it says in verse 16, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard her voice. Even when she had given up all hope, God heard her voice. And verse 17 says that God also heard the voice of the boy, where he is, under that bush, even sitting helpless in the middle of nowhere. God hears the voice of that boy. In verse 18, God says, "Come, lift the boy and hold him fast with your hands, for I will make a great nation of him." God hears and God lifts up. But God not only hears Hagar and Ishmael, God hears Abraham and Sarah. God hears Abraham in his distress. In the New Revised Standard Version, which we heard earlier, God commands Abraham in verse 12, "Do not be distressed. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she tells you." But the Hebrew on which the NRSV is based uses different language. In the Hebrew, God says to Abraham, "Whatever Sarah tells you, hear her voice." God hears her voice, and God commands to hear her voice. Her ideas were different from Abraham's, but Abraham still needed to hear her voice. Their ideas mattered, but not so much that one could completely shut out the voice of the other. In this case, listening to her voice eventually led to a separation. In fact, God encouraged the separation between Abraham and Hagar, and thus between Sarah and Hagar. Abraham was certainly neglectful in the way he handled the separation, but the separation allowed his family to move forward. In hostile situations, separation often allows everyone to move forward. It allows everyone to find a safe environment where they can speak their voice. We know it is not the ideal situation, but it is the situation that gets us moving in the family feud. God hears all voices. God hears Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, and Ishmael. And God hears them where they are, in the midst of rivalry and separation. In the bitter rivalries in our society, can one side hear the voice of the other side? If God has promises for both Isaac and for Ishmael, can one side see how God has promises for the other side? God hears all voices, and God commands us to hear the voice of others. We might not come with the solutions to fix things. We might not solve any problems, but we just might hear one another. God hears our voices. And when God hears our voices, wells appear in the desert, just as a well appeared for Hagar and Ishmael, who were thirsty and desperately needing it. When God hears our voices, two rivals can both become great nations blessed by God. When God hears our voices, God lifts us up where we are. When God plays the game show, Family Feud, God gets those uncommon answers that come from unusual circumstances because God hears the voices of those who are giving those unusual responses. God hears the voice that cries out in distress. God hears the voice that cries out in despair. God hears the voice that cries out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" God lifts up the voice, and God makes a way. Can you hear the voice? Can you hear God in our midst? Because God hears each one of us, listening to us, lifting us up, and with whatever feud, difficulty, or rivalry we may have going, God makes a way forward.